Hello, everybody. With us, we have director Jonas Poher Rasmussen. Welcome, Jonas. Thanks for being here.
No, but thanks for having me.
Um, One of the things I greatly admire about this film is the fact that you use the format, the animation of the film to fit the story. When in the process of making this film did you understand that you needed to go into the animation world to best fit the story?
It was actually from the very beginning. Had the thought that I wanted to do something with Amin for a long time. I met him when I was 15 years old, and we met in my hometown in Denmark. And already back then, I was curious about how and why he got there from Afghanistan all by himself. But he didn't want to talk about it. So I, of course, respected that. But it was kind of this black box in our friendship all these years. And then asked him if I could do a radio documentary about his story. And he said, no, I have a background in radio. And he said, no, and he said that he didn't feel ready quite yet, but he knew that he would have to share his story at some point. And when he would be ready, he would like to share it with me. So I kind of had it in the back of my head that this was something we could do together at some point. But it wasn't until I was invited for this workshop in Denmark called AniDocs, where they invite animators and documentary makers to develop ideas for animated documentaries. That I thought that this may be a good way to tell his story.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I met up with him and asked him if he would want to share his story as an animated documentary. And he was very intrigued by the fact that he could be anonymous behind the animation.
Yeah.
What you hear in the film is the very first time he tells these stories, and it's not easy for him to talk about. So the fact that he could not be in the public eye with these stories was really what helped him to start opening up.
You expand the possibilities of animation. You use two veins, two styles in the film. One is a 2D color where you showcase the true life events, and then this sort of abstract sequences of animation for the more traumatic events in his life. Can you tell us about arriving in that style?
Most of it really came from his voice, from his testimony that he gave me, all these interviews I did with him. And just by listening to that and being really careful in listening to his voice and what was, of course, there's the stories he's telling, but there's also, a storytelling just in the tone of the voice. And I could kind of tell, when he started to talk about things that were, traumatic or difficult for him to talk about, that the tone kind of changed and he would become more kind of incoherent. He would slow down. Sometimes he would even stop, and wouldn't be able to talk for a while and then continue. And I thought, but we need to see this also in the visual style of the film. And that's kind of where we came up with this more kind of surreal or expressive kind of animation to support that. Now it's not about, what things look like or what happened, but it's about an emotion he has inside, and really to try to show that instead. Try to say, okay, but now he's really inside his emotions, and we need to see what it felt like to be, on a boat and not being able, not knowing what to do, like on a sinking fishing boat, or when he talks about sisters being trapped in this container. He wasn't there, so container, but his feeling of being afraid of what was going on was there. So we wanted to show that instead. So it was really trying to balance and really trying to support the testimony where these different kinds of animation came up.
Did you have one company supervise the entire animation process, or did you have two separate teams work on the two separate styles?
We were like a core team, me, the animation director, Kenneth, and the art director, Jess Nichols. And the three of us were kind of the core creative team. But then we had two different teams to do, the classical 2D animation and the more kind of graphical. So the 2D animation was done here in Denmark mostly. All the backgrounds were done in France, but then the graphical was done by a very small team. It was actually a guy called Simon Roby, a French guy, and an animator called Gilles Cuvillier, who did that mostly. And then, of course, supervised by Kenneth and me.
I want to go back to something that you were speaking about, the trauma and the change in his voice. One of the things that I observed watching the film is that the more he goes into the traumatic experience, the more detail we hear and the specificity. Can you talk about that? And is that something that will shock you? The fact that when Amin goes into the traumatic sequences, the more we hear details and it becomes clearer to us.
No, but definitely, I think it was a big surprise to me, during the interviews to see how well spoken he was about these things. He kept this a secret for so many years, and I think he's thought it over so many times. So I think he really puts some words on it in his head before we did these interviews. But I was really surprised on how well spoken he was, and also surprised by some of the things he told me. Being on that fishing boat, that sinking fishing boat, and this cruise ship comes, and that he feels ashamed. That there's these emotions that I wouldn't expect that really came forward. But of course, also it's in the process of making the film, because in the other sequences, when you have the more kind of regular stories, when it's not about his traumas, we took out a lot of the things he said because we wanted to show it instead of just having him kind of doing voiceover for everything. But I think it was really important to hear his voice when he talked about these things that's really hard for him to talk about, and why he had some very kind of clear kind of insights that I didn't. He told me these things.
On that same thought, what I found watching the film is that we hear his voice and the story is being told, but then the animation creates an emotional world that was so unexpected. Was that something that you knew beforehand, that using animation was going to help tell the story in an emotional level, where, listening to his words and the script was very didactic and straightforward?
No, but definitely, I think, I had an experience myself when I watched Walls of Bashir back in 2009, which is also an animated doc that kind of deals with trauma. And we're exposed to so many stories all the time, so many tough stories all the time about trauma, about people being in very difficult situations in the media. All the time we have these stories around us. And talking for myself, I can't take everything in. I kind of tend to block things out, because if I took everything in, I wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. And I thought, but because you don't have to relate to a human face, it kind of eases up. You start to listen more, because you don't have a human face up there you need to relate to. And to me, it feels like there's a more kind of clear path to your heart, and you start to listen to what's actually being said. And maybe it's also something to do with the fact that the animation medium is something you grew up with. You watch animation when you're a kid. So to me, at least, I think there's a more open way directly into my emotions when I see animation. Because otherwise, when I see more kind of classical documentaries or just newsreels, I have to block things out, because there's so much all the time, all over the place.
Jonas, kind of a difficult question, but I'm just curious about the fact that this film is groundbreaking. You're pushing the boundaries of documentary filmmaking and using animation to push the boundaries of what we perceive as a documentary. When you were making it, were you conscious of the fact that, man, I'm breaking ground here?
No, not really. I think also because I had seen, animated documentaries before. There was also the Sharon. There's also a bunch of short animated docs, so I had seen it before. So to me, it's not an entirely novelty. But of course, it's not something you see a lot. It's really difficult to make. And I did, in the process of making the film, I felt like we were doing something special. But at the same time, I've had that feeling before. When I did films, and I was the only one who had that feeling. But here it seems like other people have that feeling as well.
Yeah, well, you're very modest as well. The editing, it boggled my mind. Can you talk to us about the editing? Was it done afterwards? Was it done before? It's fantastic, the editing. Talk to us about it.
No, but I was lucky to have the grand old man of editing in Denmark, a guy called Jonas Poher Rasmussen, and he's amazing. But the process of editing in animation is very different, and here even more so because I have a background in radio, so I actually started out doing my own edit in the beginning, which was just like an audio edit of all the interviews I did, and then I did scratch voices myself for all the characters that should be in there, the human traffickers and the siblings and everyone else. And then Janus would come in, and we would then get storyboards, really rough storyboards to get it in there because animation is so expensive, so you can't animate 40 hours of material and then start to cut it down. You need to kind of animate just what you need in the film. So you need to lock your edit before you start animating anything. So it's kind of like you need to edit before you start shooting anything. But what's amazing about that is that when you edit, you have storyboard artists kind of sitting there ready to provide you with the shots you want. So normally when you do documentaries, if you have a scene and you're out shooting and you turn the camera the wrong way and something happened over here, then that's just too bad. You have to work around it. But here you can ask for the exact shots you want. So we could be really precise in our way of storytelling, which was a little overwhelming because everything was kind of possible. But it was amazing really to feel the freedom and the precision in the storytelling.
But to clarify, you reverse the process. Normally in feature films and documentaries, you shoot and then we have the editing at the end. What I'm understanding is that with this, you were editing and then animating and shooting the film. Am I correct?
You're totally correct. Yes, yeah. Because it's too expensive to shoot all the animation. Normally you bring home hours and hours of material, but you can't do that because it's so expensive to animate. So you need to be exact. Okay, you need to lock the edit before you start animating anything. So we had what they called an animatic, which is like the full film where all the edits is there. Everything is there, but it's just not animated yet. So it's just like kind of rough storyboards. But the film, the story is there.
Was Amin part of this entire process? When you wrote the script, when you were editing, when you were animating the film, was Amin involved in all of this?
Yes, he was involved in all of it. In the beginning, I kind of transcribed, all the interviews I did with him. I did around 20 interviews during the span of like 3 or 4 years, and we got everything transcribed. And then I kind of made a document where I kind of chose the path because this story takes place during more than 30 years. So I really had to kind of choose the path through that story. And I figured, okay, I think I'm going to have these stories from his testimony in the film. And I would then show that document to him and he would read through it and give comments on if something was factually wrong, but also if he felt like I'd left out things that he felt was really crucial to understand his story. And the same thing in the edit. And I would also show him designs and stuff, not because he wanted, he was very generous and said, I trust you with my story. I'm not a filmmaker. I trust you to tell it. But still, I really wanted to make sure that he felt represented with the designs and how things looked.
But that trust also went in towards, not censoring, were there any moments that he felt uncomfortable? I don't want you to deal with that, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, there were things in the beginning that he didn't want to talk. In the beginning, it was just, getting the broad strokes. And then slowly we would get more and more deeper and deeper into the stories. So it was him in the beginning. It was really about making him feel comfortable and making sure that he felt this was the right time and the right way to tell his story. So it was a slow process of going deeper and deeper into it.
Speaking of feeling comfortable in the process, talk to us about him lying down, and which you never deal with in the film, and I find very peculiar. Tell us about that process.
Yeah, it's really kind of a practical thing because it's a technique of interviewing I learned when I did radio here. Like in Denmark, we have a quite big tradition for doing radio documentaries. And this technique of interviewing, in Danish, it's called moment interview, which means interview of the moment. And it's really about creating presence in the way people talk. And because in radio, you don't have an image, so you need your subject to be really descriptive in their way of talking. And by having them laying down and close their eyes and talk present tense, it's really about, they see the past in front of their eyes. They kind of relive it instead of just retelling it. So it's really a technique of interviewing to make the story feel current. And I was maybe a little naive, but I didn't think about it as a therapeutic session. But of course it was. And Amin actually told me the first time at the first interview, he said, this is going to be therapeutic for me. And just the act of sharing his story was for him kind of actually the most important thing of doing this thing.
So you mentioned therapeutic process. After the film was finished and he was able to see it, was there a letting go process for him? Is he in a better place now?
Yes, I think he is, and that's what he told me at least. For so many years he's lived a life where he couldn't really get his past and present to connect. All of his life he's had to hide parts of himself. When he was a kid, he couldn't be openly gay. And then he came to Denmark and he couldn't be honest about his past. So all his life, there's been parts of himself where he couldn't be fully who he was. So to finally to have, both being openly gay and also have the story of his past out there, now he's in a place where he feels he can be who he is, and he's settled down, and he's in that house. He ends up in the end of the film with his husband, and he really enjoys it, and he sends me photos all the time of flowers from the garden and their cats, and so he's in a good place.
Yeah, I want to latch on to you mentioning that the past and the present were dislocated, and I love the animation in the film because it underlines that. The fact that the past and the present are dislocated, and eventually in the last shot of the film, you beautifully integrate, past and the present and real life as well. It's it's phenomenal. The live action shots. Can you talk about the vintage newsreels and incorporating those moments throughout peppered throughout the film?
Yeah, but it was important for me from the beginning to kind of remind people throughout the story that it's a true story, and if you scratch the animation underneath, you have a real person and the voice is real. So just to kind of remind people that this is not a fiction, it's real, was super important to me, and also to show the reason why he has to flee and why he's forced on this flight is because of historical events that happened in the world we all belong to. And also, parts of the archival footage is taken directly from the testimony. When he talks about this person in Estonia and he talks about this Finnish TV crew who comes and films them, we could go to the Finnish film archives and ask them, do you have anything from an Estonian prison/refugee camp? And sure enough, they did. And we found this footage, and actually there's members of his family in that footage. So we thought, okay, but we need to bring that in there, to show what it was like. And the same thing, with the container the sisters were in that ship to Stockholm. That's the container they were in. So it would authenticity was really a core of the process of making this film. So we tried to be as close to the testimony and as close to the historical events as we could be.
But you changed the film ratio for the newsreels, which I think is a great choice. Can you talk about that?
No, but I think there's something, just the fact that you kind of understand that this is a certain time, people of our age will remember TV in the 80s, and it was, was 3:4. It wasn't, widescreen. So just to make sure that you get a sense of time, also just by the format of the newsreel was important to me. And all the footage I found was in 3:4. And then of course when we come to the present day, of course then it's 16:9 instead, or scope. So it was important. I think there's some storytelling just in the format as well. It's not just because it was shot that way. It's also, it gives a sense of time.
One of the most haunting aspects of the film is the music. The soundtrack is really powerful. Can you talk about arriving to the score and your composer?
There's different aspects to it. Of course, there's my collaboration with Jonas Poher Rasmussen, who's the composer for the score of the film. And he's just an amazing Swedish composer. And it was really, about finding out what's the storytelling in each scene. And I was really trying to be as precise as I could about what's the emotion here. And then he would try to make music that would support that emotion. So for example, there's the sequence when Amin has to flee Afghanistan with his family. And you have these strings that has this kind of pushing movement. Like you have this kind of sense of a push. And then all of a sudden you hear this very, very thin violin which represents Amin. And then, just kind of the feeling of him getting pushed out of the country. So that's really, on every piece of music for the score in there, we really try. And then, of course, there's also all the pop culture references, all the pop music. And that really came, a lot of it from Amin's own playlists. One of the first interviews I did with him, he talked about this Walkman he had, this pink Walkman that his sister had given him. And I asked him, what kind of music did you listen to? And to my surprise, he listened to the same kind of Scandinavian pop music I listened to when I was a kid. And I was surprised by that. I don't know. For some reason, I had expected it was some local Afghan band, but it wasn't. It was, a-ha, it was Madonna, it was Whitney Houston, it was Ace of Base, it was Roxette, all these things. I thought we need to put that in there because I really love the thought to kind of arrive in Kabul to the tones of a-ha instead of some classical Afghan instrument.
Yeah, and I love the fact that we always think of a-ha and Take On Me with the animation, and here you are, reverberating into cinema with the animation as well. So I asked you this before we went on air, but the film now is shortlisted for Best Animated Film, Best Documentary, Best International Feature. The first time in history that we have had such a situation happen. How does it feel for you?
No, but it's amazing. It feels surreal. When this thing started, when Amin and me started talking and I started doing these interviews, we thought it might be, a 20-minute animated film. And then the project just kind of grew and grew and grew. And I honestly didn't expect it to be where it is today. So it's just really amazing to see that this story resonates with people around the world and that people take it in. It really means a lot to me, especially, of course, because he's such a close friend. So to give him this voice and that he gets a story out there where he feels seen and where a lot of other people feels represented as well as being nuanced characters, because a lot of refugee stories are very kind of black and white. It really means a lot, and yeah. So it's just an honor, really.
Well, speaking of honor, it's an honor to be with you, and I cannot wait for the next project, Jonas, and to actually meet you in person. You're so talented. We wish you the best.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Have a great night.